Hello, everybody. It's that time again. My name is Alan. Let's talk metal. Tonight, I want to do another installment in my sort of mini series on heavy metal compilation albums. And tonight, I want to talk about possibly the most iconic series of heavy metal compilations ever made, and that's the Metal Massacre series from Metal Blade Records. This was what really put heavy metal on the map in the United States in a lot of ways. So we'll walk through some of the volumes tonight and see what bands kind of got their start there and what all the series included. It went on much longer than folks realize. Now, I do not have hard copies of all the volumes, not by a long shot. So what I'll be showing off tonight are some of the earlier volumes, and I have them in kind of an unusual format. So let's begin with a little story time, and I'll show off kind of one of my favorite items in my collection. Don't take this out very often, so it's kind of a fun chance to flip through it. This is a box set of the first 5 volumes of Metal Massacre, all on picture discs. All right. They did a limited run of 1,000 of these. They had them numbered, so as you can see, they got the certificate there on the back. This is something I've had for a very long time. Picked this up, let me think, probably around 1993, 94, somewhere in there. Possibly 95, but certainly no later than that. The way I got this was when I was at college. I think it took the dude at the local indie record store literally less than 2 weeks to know me on a first-name basis. Those of you who know a little bit about me know I grew up in pretty small, rural, southern area. And so when I went off to college, I was at a small school in the Midwest outside of Toledo, Ohio. There was no kind of local heavy metal scene or anything like that, but there was a store called Mad Hatter Music Company. And I quickly made it my home away from dorm. Was down there several times a week, browsing, looking around, talking to Jim, who's a super nice guy. He quickly identified me as like, yep, you're one of the new kids who's going to be a lifer here. Welcome aboard. Really, really nice. And it also took Jim no time at all to pick up on the fact that I was looking for heavy metal stuff. And sometime, I'm probably going to say it was during my sophomore year, I wandered into Mad Hatter one day, as I was not the least bit unusual. And Jim's like, hey, I've got something here that you need to see. And somebody, he told me someone had brought in some stuff, to sell back. And one of the things was this box set of picture discs of the old Metal Massacre compilations. I had never seen it before, never heard of it. My jaw hit the floor, and I'm just like, oh, that's cool. And Jim's like, it's really neat. It's like, I don't know anything about it. I was actually hoping maybe you could tell me how rare it is, what it's worth, anything like that. I'm like, I don't know, but I can contact some folks and find out for you. I was already doing some mail order for vinyl stuff by that point. And so, yep, that night, went back to the dorm. This is back when you had to pay for long distance calls on a rotary phone attached to a wall. Story time with Grandpa here, I told you. But yeah, talked to a couple of guys, got a little information for him. So I went back, in a day or two, talked to Jim. So it's like, here's what I know. It's like, yeah, it's limited to 1,000. They're real hard to find. It's one of those things that kind of disappeared into the collecting woodwork really fast. They don't turn up very often. And the guys were quoting me prices, probably around $100 to $200 is what you'd want to ask for it. That somewhere in that range would be a fair price. He's like, okay, that's really awesome. He's like, do you want it? I'm just like, I would love to have it. I am broke college student, washing dishes, paying my way through school. It's like, that's super cool. I don't have that kind of money. He's like, well, I didn't price it to you yet. I'm just like, true. Well, how much technically do you want? 100 or 200? Or what? He's just like, I will sell you the box set for $50. I'm just like, okay, 3, carry the 1, factor in the phone bill. How much cat food can I eat and not end up having to go to the student health center? Deal. So I ended up buying it from it. It was a ton of money for me to spend on something at that time, but never regretted it. It was a great purchase. And at the time, I might have had one or two of the volumes, but I certainly didn't have all five. I may have only had one of them. So it was a really good chance for me to hear all of those classic old compilations. I had always loved Metal Blade Records. It was one of the defining record labels, along with Noise Records, that really shaped what I liked. I already knew a lot of the Metal Blade discography by heart, but I had not been able to get a lot of those early compilations. And that's how I ended up with this cool box set. So let's crack this baby open carefully. It's actually hinged, so give me a moment here while I very gently open this up. And we take a look at what's inside. You do get cool swag with Metal Blade logo pin. But the bigger thing, of course, is you get the first 5 volumes of the series. And they're all on picture discs that look like this, where the cover's fully inserted, and it's got like a red border around the edges of the picture discs. So let's start in the beginning. Actually, I thought I already had these in order, so oops, I have to wait for a second as I dig them out. Again, this box is kind of old and fragile, so apologies if I'm moving a little slower, but trying to be really careful with this thing. All right, most folks know the deal, or at least part of the deal, with Volume 1 of the series. It's the record that launched Metal Blade Records. It's the album that launched the career of some band. I think they made an album called Ride the Lightning or something. Maybe some of you have heard of it. But yeah. Oh, sorry, just a few other neat things that are kind of down here too. Some of the promotional stuff that was included in the label with the box, just here and there. Even came with like sort of like a little iron-on patch of a thing. So all cool stuff still in there to this day. But yeah, then we get to Metal Massacre, Volume 1. Now, this one, the iconic track, of course, is it features Metallica, and that goes on to reshape the history of heavy metal as we would know it. But you've got some other cool stuff featured on here as well. One of Metal Blade's popular early bands, Bitch, is featured on here. You have an early Curious Ungle track called Death of the Sun on here. A few other bands that would go on to all do stuff for Metal Blade, like Demon Flight, made one of their early EPs on Metal Blade. So yeah, iconic record, big piece of heavy metal history for US metal. Metal Massacre Volume 1 went through a few different iterations over time. It got repressed in 1982, but was kind of licensed and put out through another label called Metalworks. And that's the one you see that has like a plainish gray cover with the logo in black. And then we get subsequent reissues on Metal Blade later on. But the track listing got changed a little bit on each version. So you can hold multiple versions of this and not have quite the same lineup each time. I'm going to just read a blurb here. I'm actually just getting this off Wikipedia because it's a little convoluted and it's kind of late. I'm kind of tired. And so rather than just butcher this, let's just read through the blurb here real quick on what goes on with these early editions. So the first pressing, the original Metal Blade release, Metal Blade Records 1001. Then let's see. The song by Black and Blue, Chains Around Heaven, had to replace Steeler's Cold Day in Hell. The band Steeler had already been picked up by a label, and so Metal Blade couldn't really use their song by that point. All right, so the Steeler track was only on the original version of the compilation. Also, version number 2, the Metalworks version, had a different take of Metallica's Hit the Lights on it. It was a new recording, as James Hetfield was unhappy with the original version. The second pressing features Dave Mustaine alone on lead guitar instead of having Lloyd Grant as lead guitar on the first solo and Dave Mustaine playing the second solo. That was how version 1 was done. See, also version 1 reportedly had James Hetfield on bass and rhythm guitar, while Ron McGovney was not actually playing on version 1 while credited. Version 2, with Dave Mustaine alone on lead guitar and Rob McGovney on bass, is the same version included on the No Life Till Leather demo that came out in July of 1982. Also, Rats Tell the World was omitted on subsequent pressings, starting with Metal Blade's 1984 reissue. So the Rat song is only on some of those early pressings of this also, and that's why some of these tracks, aren't on the picture disc. So yeah, going back over to the picture disc here, you don't have a few of the tracks here. This version starts with the Black and Blue song. It doesn't have the Rat track featured on it, or of course the Steeler track, because this is a later reissue of the box set. So that's what's up with Volume 1. As I shuffle through these to find Volume 2, just another fun side note, Metal Blade actually did another box set of the Metal Massacre early volumes that wasn't on picture discs, but instead each one is on colored vinyl. And I think that box set includes volumes, I want to say it's volumes 1 through 6. It's been a long time since I've seen one of those, and so it might be something slightly different. But it's kind of a similar package thing. The colored vinyl ones were originally put out as like a European-only product, so you don't see those as often in the US. All right, hey, that filled exactly the right amount of space for me to find Metal Massacre Volume 2. So Volume 2 also came out in 1982, and this one features a lot of classic bands on it, of course. You've got Armored Saint with a good track by them, Lesson Well Learned. You've got Third Stage Alert, who did one of the early sort of EP mini album releases that is, it has a couple of songs on it I like. The cover is hilarious. It's somebody who's supposed to be like in a big radiation suit, just on a plain black background. It kind of inadvertently looks like a weird beekeeper's suit. So yeah, there's that. You've got an early Obsession song. Obsession, of course, did material and has been around for a long time. Savage Grace is featured on here with Scepters of Deceit. And let's see, out of curiosity, this is when, let's see, Kenny Powell is not in Savage Grace by that time. I think he'd already moved on to Omen by that point. You have an Overkill song on here called No Holds Barred, but it's not the famous thrash band Overkill. It's a band, if I remember right, this one's out of LA. Side 2 begins with one of Metal Blade's classic tracks. It's Lucifer's Hammer by Warlord, one of the true heavy metal anthems of the 1980s. You have a track by Trauma on here. And this does, of course, feature Cliff Burton pre-Metallica on it. Not a bad track, such a shame. Then you've also got a few lesser-known ones like Dietrich, Molten Leather. So a track on here by a band called Hyksos, who did release a pretty obscure full-length album in the early 80s. And you also have Aloha, which is an early Marty Friedman Aloha, Vixen, Hawaii. That band kind of went through several iterations and name changes, but one of their tracks is featured on here as well. It's, which track? Heavy Metal Virgin. So yeah, Volume 2 features sort of, a lot of, classic bands that would, put out quality material later on. Not all on Metal Blade, but they would get releases here and there. All right. Then we move on to Volume 3. These things couldn't have been more out of order if I'd tried. Sorry about that. Volume 3 would come out, I believe it's the following year. Yeah, it'd be 1983 when Volume 3 would come out. This one, really plain cover to it. Has some very big name stuff included in the track list. This is Slayer leading it off with Aggressive Perfector. And of course, Slayer would do some of the early Metal Blade stuff. And pretty sure they stuck around for a while, maybe made 1 or 2 more albums. I don't know. Bitch gets another appearance here. There's a band called Tyrant, Battle for Armageddon. They made 2 good albums on heavy metal that have been repressed several times. Really good sort of early power metal sound to them. A little over the top, but good stuff. Let's see. A few unknown bands on here. Black Widow, Test Pattern. Test Pattern. I don't know what to make of that one. Let's see. Side 2 starts yet again with the Immaculate Warlord and one of their great tracks called Miss Victoria. Virgin Steel gets an appearance on here. Not one of their better tracks. It's called Let's Go All the Way, and it's definitely one of their more sort of party rockin' kind of songs. Nothing at all like what they would do later on post Guardians of the Flame. Band on here called Sexist that I don't know anything about. Snow White is on here. That band stuck around for a while. Then you also close it out with Marauder and Lamort. So yeah, Volume 3 has a few more unknowns on it. So it has the big name ones with Slayer, of course, Bitch, Warlord, and Tyrant being the best known of the batch. Volume 3 has never been my favorite one. I feel like the unknown bands never stuck with me at all. But of course, it did have a few classic tunes, Warlord being my personal favorite. All right, next up, we've got Volume 4, which is this one. And this is my favorite of the series, hands down, no contest. It's one of my favorite heavy metal compilation albums of all time, bar none. The funny thing with Volume 4 is that it lacks the star power that most of these other early volumes have. There's no Slayer or Metallica or Overkill or anything like that on here. Let's double check. I think the biggest name band on Volume 4 is Trouble. Which Trouble, great band, but well, let's see. Lizzie Borden is also on here. I forgot about that one. So that's those are the 2 sort of quote unquote marquee bands on here. The thing I love about this volume is that all of the smaller bands are absolutely fantastic. A lot of them on this volume, which came out in '83 also, a lot of these bands have a very heavy sound that leans a little bit in a slightly darker, doomy direction. They're not doom metal per se, but they fit in well alongside the early Trouble track on here, that they've got that kind of sound about them. Let's run through the track list real quick here. You've got some good faster tracks too. Sacred Blade with the Alien is a really blazing number. Canadian band called Death Dealer with Cross My Way, which is a real fist pounder. They did some good material over time. Trouble checks in with The Last Judgment. I like a lot of Trouble material. Some of the early Trouble material is a little hit or miss for me. It's not bad at all, but I don't hold them in the same high regard that a lot of folks do on the early albums. You have Scepters, Taken by Force. Scepter, was kind of tied in with the bands, like Agent Steel, Abattoir. There were some members that kind of moved back and forth among these bands and stuff. So, yep, excellent song there. Zoetrope clocks in with Speedzone, which is another incredibly good fast one. And the first side closes out with War Cry and Forbidden Evil. And that is a great track. War Cry, I'm pretty sure, if I'm thinking right, came out of Chicago. And this one has, again, that just real heavy, rumbly, it's almost like power doom metal. It works really well. Side 2, you've got Abattoir Screams from the Grave. Again, this is when John Cirrus was in the band. So there's, again, that kind of crossover with Agent Steel and Scepter, those bands intertwined. There's a cool song here by a band called Witch Slayer, not to be confused with Witch Killer, because these guys slay witches, they don't kill them. There's a subtle but important difference there somewhere. But yeah, Witch Slayer may also have been a Chicago area band, and they did some cool demo tracks. I've got a bootleg of a live recording of theirs. It's pretty good. Lizzie Borden has a really good song on here called Rod of Iron. I admittedly don't know Lizzie Borden's catalog as well as I probably should, but this is a really good tune from him. August Red Moon has a great song on here called Fear No Evil. They did it's a 12-inch, I forget how many songs are on it. It's somewhere around EP, mini LP in length. It's got a weird cover where it's like a kind of deep red cover, and it's got like a metal fist with a big gauntlet, but it's in like a white opera glove. I don't know what to tell you. It was the 80s. They put all kinds of weird stuff on album covers. Everybody was doing a lot of cocaine and had weird ideas about what looked good on album covers. Regardless, Fear No Evil, it's the best August Red Moon track, in my opinion. The EP is not bad, but this one is a real scorcher of a tune. And you've also got a track by Thrust. They would, of course, do an album on Metal Blade in the early days, and a track by Medieval, which Medieval, again, had this kind of, really powerful doomy sound and did a couple of releases, including Medieval Kills. So it's just start to finish almost perfect. Every band tracking in with good, heavy, powerful stuff, even though most of the bands really, were pretty obscure overall. All right, moving on to the last one that's included in the box set, which is Metal Massacre 5. And this, again, I think is one of the volumes that's a little better known, it's considered one of the marquee volumes because of some of the bands included on it. It's pretty stacked. So yeah, we got a 1984 release date. This one, the print is really dark on this, so I want to read this off the screen. I've got here instead. You have Omen checking in with Torture Me, really good song by classic US early power metal band. You have Voivod with Condemned to the Gallows, making their early appearance for Metal Blade. You've got Attacker with their classic song, Call on the Attacker. It's a very good song. They did some material. A lot of people rave about their Metal Blade album. It was never one of my personal favorites, but yeah, they did some good stuff. They made a second album as well later on. Future Tense is on here. They made a cool EP or mini album later on. Now the quote unquote real Overkill shows up with a great early tune called Death Rider that they kind of reworked a little bit. Some of their early tracks you can hear sound a little bit like Death Rider redone, but love this one here. Fate's Warning, John Arch and company are on here. Unfortunately, it's the song Soldier Boy, which is not what I would have picked to include. Not their strongest track, in my opinion. Metal Church, one of the iconic bands, great material in the 80s, but they show up with The Brave. And again, that is not the Metal Church song I reach for when I want to hear a Metal Church song. You've also got, let's see, what else? A band called Lethal Sin, a band called Final Warning, which there was a band called Final Warning that put out some more material. I'm guessing it's the same, but didn't check up on that. This volume is also known for having Hellhammer. You had a non-US band included, and this is their track Crucifixion. So you get to hear Tom G. Warrior and Mates bang one out. Then it wraps up with Mace and Jesters of Destiny, who I don't know much about, but they did put out some more material for Metal Blade later on. So again, this volume is pretty stacked with, quote unquote star power and bands like Omen, Voivod, Overkill, Fate's Warning, Metal Church, and Hellhammer. My problem, if I have to nitpick with Volume 5, is that while it's got a great lineup for bands, they didn't pick the best songs for some of these bands. I would much rather have heard something like Night on Brocken from Fate's Warning. Metal Church, I might have picked almost any song other than The Brave from Metal Church. It's not that it's a terrible song, it's just that they had other songs that were so much better than that one. But, it's the way it goes. So that gets you through the first 5 volumes of the series. Moving into 1985, we've got Volume 6. These volumes I don't have hard copies to show off. I've had a lot of these in the past. I just don't own them all anymore. Volume 6 is always where I felt that quality started to drop off a little bit. Not a ton. There's still a lot of good stuff here, as you'll see. But again, there's a reason I don't own a lot of these volumes. They just didn't have enough songs that I wanted to keep the albums around. You've got Possessed is featured. Nasty Savage is on here. You've got Mayhem. No, it's not that Mayhem. Not quite. Hades is featured, Hyrax is featured, Dark Angel with Welcome to the Slaughterhouse is featured. So something you'll notice here is that it's definitely going in a heavier direction with a lot of these bands. That now you're getting into the heavier side of thrash. And that's kind of reflective of what was starting to happen in the heavy metal scene around this point. This is 1985, so it's not quite the big year of thrash, 1986 just yet. But you're seeing the transition here away from the stuff that, nothing on Volume 4, for example, had this kind of sound. There's nothing that was thrashy on Metal Massacre Volume 4. You had some bands that were doing really good speed metal and power metal type stuff, but nothing even necessarily classified as straight out thrash. Now in Volume 6, you're getting a lot of thrash stuff mixed in. You have Hallows Eve Metal Merchants, which they would become a thrash band. Their early stuff probably is just, more traditional US. Some folks might call it US power metal. Some might not. That's okay. A couple of others that stand out here. The Obsessed makes an appearance. Yep, Wino's band with Concrete Cancer. And the sleeper of the whole compilation is a band called Pathfinder. And they have a song called Fountain Keeper on here that's really good. It's a bit reminiscent of early Fate's Warning. In particular, it makes me think of The Apparition off of Spectre Within. Really, really cool track. But it's also one of the more obscure bands on the compilation. So, yeah, that's most of the lineup from the Volume 6. So again, there's still some marquee named bands on here, but you can see how metal was trending in a different direction. I think that's part of the reason that this volume, just doesn't stick with me as much. All right, you get to 1986 and Volume 7 comes out. And Volume 7, you have a couple of bigger name things, but you're starting to feel like now they're featuring bands that maybe, more at the demo level, or again, you don't want to say they're not scraping the bottom of the barrel. That sounds very harsh, but by this point, the scene's getting pretty saturated with bands. And so it's getting harder to find those real gems of bands that, are going to stand out. Anyway, from Volume 7, Sentinel Beast is featured. They made an album that's pretty popular to this day. You have Commanders featured with the High and Mighty. Their albums become very collectible over time. Not a personal favorite, but a lot of folks dig it. Juggernaut and Cryptic Slaughter, sort of, lesser known bands, but, had a career to them. The big one featured on here is Flotsam and Jetsam with I Live, You Die. But yeah, that's kind of it for, marquee ones. Among the smaller bands like Crank and Have Mercy, none of them stuck with me over time. Titanic is on here with The Awakening, and that is a band that did go on and make a sort of small collectible independent released album. So yeah, with Volume 7, there's not much there that stands out to me. It's not a bad collection of songs at all, but, we're several pegs down the ladder from where we were at with, like Volumes 4 or Volume 5 here. Volume 8 would come out in 1987, and again, you're getting like, sort of one band that made it, and a lot of bands that didn't go very far for reasons is just like, well, yeah, these just don't stand out as much. The big band on here was Sacred Reich, their track Ignorance. Sacred Reich was never my favorite thrash band. I always found them just a little bit boring compared to a lot of their contemporaries. I like some of their songs here and there, but they're very much a band where I want to hear this song, this song, this song, and okay, then I've heard enough. Viking did some cool albums, but, again, they never really were able to stand out, from the rest of the crowd. They're one of those bands that started to get lost in the field by this point. For me, the standout track is definitely Overlord's Keeper of the Flame. This was a band from North Carolina. I've talked about them in other videos. I included some songs by them on the Let's Hear Metal miniseries videos I did a while back. So that's an excellent tune. Really, really good one right there. Other than that, you have a track by Gargoyle. You have a track by a band called Ripper, Death Awaits You. They did an album. They were kind of little bit goth tinge, sort of shock horror metal theme to them. Um, Reactions to Ripper are usually either that somebody feels it's either a little too gimmicky or they absolutely love it. It's a band that has, very much sort of a cult following to them. I never got into them quite. I never could quite. For me, it's like it's on the line, but it kind of leans just a little too much on the cheesy side of that line for me to really get into. But it is an album that a lot of people enjoy. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at here. Cobalt, Blue, War God. There's both ESP and LSN. Acronyms were in at the time. There was a sale at the Period store. I don't know. Anyway, moving on, Volume 9. This is the last one, in my opinion, that had a couple of real high-quality tunes on it, and there are two. It starts off with two great tracks. You have Banshee delivering We Want You, which is a really powerful, forceful number, delivered really well. And the follow-up is Oliver Magnum with Old World Nights, which is a classic of late 80s US power speed metal. A little band from Oklahoma that never quite made it over the hump, but did some great stuff, had a self-titled album that's one of those sort of unsung minor classics of the era. After those two tracks, though, nothing else on this volume ever really caught my attention. You got Toxic is on here. You have a band actually called Pedophile. That wasn't even in good taste in the late 80s. Faith or Fear, Overdose, The Wrath, Chaos Horde. I've owned this album. I've played this album. I can't tell you what any of those sound like. It's been too long, and they never made much of an impression. So yeah, this is kind of the last of the volumes, I feel like. Well, there are at least still two good songs. You get to volume 10, came out in 1989, and by this point, most folks would agree that the series had kind of run out of gas. It'd run its course, done its thing, not a whole lot left here. Let's see if we can find anything. The band Confessor is on here with The Secret. That band's always had a little bit of a cult following. Let's see. Other ones. I'm hard pressed to even recognize any bands on here. You have a band called Slaughter. Is that The Slaughter? Yeah, that's the Canadian band. Okay, so there's a Slaughter tune on here. Good for volume 10. Forgot about that. But yeah, ROT, Dan Colette. I thought we'd got out of the habit of naming our bands after one of the band members by at least 1983. Come on, that's not going to cut it for a metal band in the 90s. IDK. Once again, what's with all the three-letter acronyms here, folks? I don't know. Seems like pretty slim pickings on Volume 10. Hey, if you're a big fan of Volume 10 and I'm missing something here, leave a comment below. Let me know what I've overlooked. It's quite possible there's a gem on here and I just don't remember it. All right, let's look through some of these later volumes and see what else we see. Metal Massacre 11 came out in 91. Now, as you get into 1991, that's a year when music changed a lot. By the late fall of that year, you had Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and the Black Album kind of redirect the way music was going. So yeah, things are shifting here a lot. You do have Mystic Force, which is another one of those sort of overlooked but decent U.S. power metal bands. Same boat, the band Forte, which, if I remember right, some members of Oliver Magnum ended up in Forte. Forte made a couple of albums. They were never great, but they were worth hearing. Again, especially considering that traditional heavy metal pickings were getting pretty lean in the US by the time you're in the early 90s here. The band was worth checking out for that alone. You've got Ministers of Anger, Dominance, Mortal Rain. I don't know any of these. Spud Monsters? Yeah, that's where we're at. Not a lot of things to really sink into with there. Metal Massacre Volume 12 wouldn't come out until 1995, which right away tells you that even the label was feeling like this wasn't a flagship for the label anymore by any means. Is there anything on volume 12 of note? There is a song by Avernus, which is sort of a goth metal band. I always kind of liked them. Some of their early stuff was a bit heavier, and then they got into much more cleaner singing and less heavy material. But Avernus is on here with Godlessness. Ancient is on here. Again, is like Metal Blade's early signing from the Norwegian black metal scene. There's a band called Tipper Gore and Gunga Din. I'm just naming bands after random sort of famous people here, I guess now. Let's see, Anne Christ Wept. I vaguely remember that band being around. Big Twin Din. Yeah, in case you're wondering, this volume, I'm pretty sure it was not one of the better sellers in the Metal Blade catalog from 1995. It would be over a decade before Metal Massacre would see another volume come out. And this came out in, let's see, 2006 for volume 13. And what do we have here? There's a couple of bands on this one that actually aren't bad. It starts off with Celador, which best way to describe Celador is that they're sort of like a Blind Guardian clone from, if I remember right, they're from either Iowa or Nebraska. Not where you expect to find sort of high speed, power speed metal. They're a little bit like an American version of Dragon Force, but less goofy. The song Leaving All Behind is a pretty good one. They made an album for Metal Blade around that time that was pretty good, and they've done some subsequent releases. Not bad. You're also seeing stuff on here, though, like the Black Dahlia Murder, 6 Feet Under. Did you really need to include 6 Feet Under on a Metal Massacre compilation in 2006? It's not exactly like that band needed to be broke big by that point. They'd kind of already done their thing. Bolt Throwers on here with Kill Chain. And again, it's kind of like, why include Bolt Thrower? In this case, the compilations have gone more from introducing new bands and sort of showing off new talent to just featuring stuff we've got on our label. Hey, Black Dahlia Murders on Metal Blade Records. Sorry, not my kind of thing. Hey, the Red Chord is on here too. That's Metal Blade's lineup 2006. God Dethroned, Ammon Amarth featured. And again, these aren't bands that you need to be showing off on a compilation album, especially not in 2006. So it's kind of a weird lineup, but at least has some recognizable bands, some better tunes here and there. Okay, whatever. Volume 14 would come out another 10 years later. And so again, they're still grinding along, but taking their time with it. I recognized 2 or 3 things here, and there's actually a couple of decent songs. You might think by this point the series was just a complete wash, but no. You have a song called The Siege of Jerusalem by Stone Dagger. This band recorded a really, really good demo, and then I think they just fell apart and never got fully signed, which is a shame. I really liked that demo. It included The Siege of Jerusalem. There's only maybe 2 songs on it. It was a very short demo. But yeah, I remember it made a buzz there in the 20-teens, and a lot of folks were like, "Oh, this is really good. Let's wait for him to release something. Let's keep waiting." Oh, rats! I don't think it's going to happen. So, but they did get some exposure here. Crypt Sermon is on here with Will of the Ancient Call. This band, of course, has gone from strength to strength and had excellent second album come out. Also, the band Corsair is featured on here. And that band has a very 70s throwback style. They're often kind of compared to Thin Lizzy, which the material I've heard by Corsair is a little, it's like the most laid back Thin Lizzy material. It's not like the really, harder edged rocking stuff, at least from the Corsair stuff I heard, which was, I think, their first EP. Visigoth and Raven Cult are featured on here. So you're actually, interestingly, seeing the series start to once again feature bands that are closer to the traditional flavors of heavy metal, back like they were doing, on those first, 4 or 5 volumes. So that is the end of the line thus far. So will 2026 that 10-year window rolls around and maybe we'll finally get to Metal Massacre volume. We'd be up to 15 at that point. Yeah, we've gotten through 14 volumes so far. Has the series run its course? Will Brian Slagel break it back out? And if so, which direction will it go in? Is it going to show off more sort of new wave of traditional heavy metal bands? Is it going to go back to, showing off, heavy thrash or death metal or unsigned bands that maybe have some real gems hidden among them? Don't know, but it'll be interesting to find out. All right, time for me to call it quits. And let's talk metal in the comments down below. I am sure I have pissed off somebody by ragging on or overlooking a track that they really like from some of these later volumes, or even one of the early volumes that I glossed over. Leave a comment down below and let me know that I'm a stupid doo-doo head because I don't recognize the genius of this track, or that I totally should have mentioned that track, or how could I hate volume 11 so much because it's got these great songs on it that went right over my head. Leave a comment down below and fill me in. I'll be glad to go back and check some of these out if I'm wrong. All right, that's enough for this volume. Until next time, everybody stay safe and remember, keep banging your head.